But this project, we showed it in Chile, where there was also a long dictatorship, 17 years of dictatorship. And we did a workshop with Chilean performers. Some of them were coming from theater, some of them were not related to arts, about their stories. And then we did another piece that was called The Year I Was Born, which was reconstructing the life of people who were born during the dictatorship in Chile. And it was also becoming more and more polemic, because it was really like in Chile, 17 years of Pinochet really kind of left a big trace you could say, a mark in society, and somehow, because Pinochet was not judged, basically he died as a senator with honors after he killed I don't know how many people. But in this case, we went one step further in this project, because I was starting to develop this kind of idea that we could create a community that could discuss on a subject, in this case military dictatorship, and these discussions would be part of the piece. So when they were discussing about their parents' past and what it meant and how was the recent history of Chile, I was recording these discussions, and then it became part of the text, this confrontation between them. And to frame these discussions, we did a very simple game, so to say, that was then reproduced on stage. That sounds simple, but it took it was getting very, very hard with the time. That was that they had to put themselves in a line according to the orientation of their father's ideology from right to left. So imagine if we do it now. We will have to stand in a line, I feel my father is very right. No, but I feel my father, you know what I mean? And we have to agree on who is more right or who is more left. And in this group, where there were sacerdotes of policemen, of military people, of people who were with the guerrilla, people who were killed, people who were supporting the extreme right-wing movement that was supporting Pinochet, the intellectual side of the military dictatorship. They had to agree on who is more right or who is more left, and make a line. And the discussions that happened there were very interesting, because they were in a way reflecting how much the society was not able to agree on what really happened and who is responsible for it. So they would say, no, but your father is more right because he was a policeman, and then that would the son of a right-wing movement that was supporting Pinochet, very extreme right-wing movement, was saying, no, your father was more right than mine because he was in the police. And then the son of the policeman would say, no, your father is more right because he was the one, my father was following orders, but your father was giving, the ideas for Pinochet, was creating this consensus intellectually for the dictatorship and so on. So these discussions were somehow showing how much everybody was blaming the other, no, it's more the responsibility of the military people or the police, or no, it's more the responsibility of the right-wing bourgeoisie, high class, that was in a way wanting this dictatorship to happen. And on the left side the same. There was no agreement in the different groups, because they were coming from different groups of the left. So there were Mapu, Mir, and so on, and they would say, no, no, Mapu is less left than Mir because you were with the Democrats and you were not, and then the others would say, no, but you made agreements with this and that. And also between people whose parents went to exile and people whose parents stayed and were killed. And she would say, no, you feel that you're more left because your mother was killed. You know, and this is very difficult to say, you know, because your mother was killed. And you think you're more left than my mother who stayed, who left to exile to Mexico. You think you are more, you know, how do we, you know, who are we blaming also in terms of who left, who stayed, who paid, who fought against, who helped from the outside, like what is the position of the exiled people in terms of like making visible what was happening in Chile at that time. So somehow it was like saying things in this kind of game, the things that were told were things that were flying in society about how to understand this dictatorship. And this piece was interesting because as long as the year passed, and it was performed also for years, and it finished last year, it was the last show, it was such a confrontative group, such a polemic group, that sometimes, I mean, it happened that people started to give up. So, for example, Pablo Diaz, who was the son of this right-wing guy, who was the leader of this right-wing movement that was called Fatherland and Liberty, he left the piece because he couldn't stand it anymore to be there talking about his father. Because in fact, he never broke with his father. He was still trying to justify, you know, him. And at some point he couldn't anymore, so he couldn't like stand on stage and tell his story. And he couldn't be confronted to the others' stories. So he just decided to, okay, I will leave the project. And then
what do you do when people leave the project, Lola? What happens when people
in
leave?
this case, it never happened to me before that somebody says I cannot do it anymore. But in this case, I felt it was okay for him to leave because, in a way, I understood that he wasn't aware of what he was doing when he entered the project. He wasn't aware of what it means because he was an actor himself, like a famous actor from TV. You know, saying live in the theater, I am the, you know, the son of this guy, and this guy is really like the evil, you know what I mean? Like, if you, like, it's really like, and he was called Pablo because of Pinochet lawyer. So it was really like the, you know, he was coming from the heart of this, you know, dictatorship, and he didn't realize how much people were, in a way, people were moved by the fact that he was doing it. But on the other hand, people were showing also their anger to him, their anger for what his father did. And I think he never got confronted to that before. Because still in Chile, you can live in a kind of bubble where nobody talks about politics, and you are like, and he was belonging to this like very high-class world where people wouldn't talk about these things. So the fact that he was on stage, confronted to this story, and receiving all kind of reactions, people who were very moved and thanked him for doing it, but people who were very angry and talked to him like, how can you support your father until today, and so on. So at some point it was like, he thought it was going to be easier because he never got really aware of what it means, what his father did, and what it means for society. So I think when he got aware, it was too much for him. Like, he couldn't stand it anymore. And even though we were very supportive, because the group was very supportive in terms of we were sharing this, and this is like our past, the past of our country, we are here to talk about this, not to judge the sons and daughters because of what their parents did. It was just too much for him and he couldn't stand it. And then we said, it's okay, you can go. He was anyway a very conflicted person in the group, so we were relieved. But nevertheless, these tensions that were always there, and this group worked together for, I don't know, 5 years, yeah, until last year we did the last show, so it's like 2012 to 2017. And in the last show, and I was amazed, one of the actors, Jorge, who is, yeah, a man, Jorge was reconstructing the story of his father, and his father was like a person coming from a very like uneducated lower class, I don't know what to say, yeah, like from like a very, a guy who was unemployed, all the dictatorship, but he was a very hard Pinochet supporter. So even if like dictatorship was a disaster for him and he was living in a place where it was continuously repressed and people would, like, police would enter and shoot in his area, in his neighborhood, and he was still supporting Pinochet until the end. No? So these kind of crazy contradictions of life. And this actor who was reconstructing the story of his father, and he was saying, my father hated the communists the most, and then he started to hate everyone else, like foreigners and blah blah. So he was describing really like how this father was a kind of fascist. And in the last show, there is a moment of the piece where they are all saying, where are their parents today? And who are them and what are they doing? And in the last show, his father died like just before the last shows. And in the last show he said, well, my father died and none of the people here came to the funeral. Like, and everybody was shocked. So he used the last show to make it like a public complaint about how the others were sharing the stories with him for 5 years and were like, in a way supported, but they didn't go to the funeral of his father. But he did it in a very aggressive way, because you can't tell the people, yeah, like why you didn't come to the funeral, or I was needing you to come, or whatever, in a kind of private situation. They were a group of theater working together, but he decided to make it publicly, you know, to kind of close this whole project of 5 years, which gave them a lot of like beautiful moments as a group, and they were traveling together, they were sharing a lot of things, they did things they never did before. And he decided to close it with this kind of, you never came to the funeral of my father, and my father died alone, as blah, blah, blah. And then it was like a kind of statement of, yeah, there is no reconciliation, you know, there is no like. And I thought, wow, it's crazy how, you know, sometimes there are, yeah, even if the group was so supportive to each other and was so great and they did so many things together, there is this, ¿cómo se dice rencor? Resentment. That sometimes can't go away, you know, like you want to stay with it, you want to stick to it. But I think it's really interesting also how these works are in a way evolving with time. So these are like theater performances that were done for many years, and they were evolving in terms of, sometimes I had to rewrite scenes because things happen in the life of the performers and we had to readapt. But it was also evolving in terms of the relationship between them. So things will happen between them and we will have to adapt the text to this new state of the relationship. And yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Lola, about how different it is? With Argentina, it was also your history, or the history of your country and your past. With Chile, it wasn't. How different was it as a process for you? Or was it Was it similar, and what were the differences or tensions of it not being your kind of country's history in many ways?
I had to do more research in terms of like I had to really get to know the story better because it wasn't something that I grew up with. But I think it helped me in terms of I had a distance. In fact, I felt more free. Because when I was working with my own history, the history of my country, there were so many voices in my head, like, you shouldn't say this, you're now, when you say that, you're supporting this idea of the two demons and that they were two sides. And if you do that, you're like, blah, blah, blah. So, and all the literature, all the movies I saw about the dictatorship, so that I had so much like pressure on me, on my own story or the story of my family or whatever. And when I went to Chile, I felt more free in a way. I felt more that I was looking at this history from the outside, so I could see things. And I felt free to do things that, I remember like the Marco Antonio de la Parra, who's a playwright, he wrote an article about the piece and he said like, it could only this piece could only have been done by an outsider. Because no one would dare to do that who was raised here. So I think that was an advantage in the case of the Chilean piece.
But you were also an outsider in the Argentinian case, considering that you were not directly affected.
Yes, that's true. Because there was always this. There were pieces or films that were talking about the dictatorship from the perspective of the sons and daughters, but it was always made by people who were directly linked to the subject. That means like sons and daughters of people who disappeared, or you know what I mean. So, and I didn't have a story myself of like my parents didn't go to exile or disappear or anything. So there was always this question of why are you doing this? You know, like as if we were not all sons and daughters of this time, as if we were not all responsible or being like shaped by this past. It was like I always had to justify myself because of doing